Good morning again. We're out here in the soybean field and wanting to do a couple of scouting tips here for you today. One of them being that we want to growth stage our soybeans a little bit to try to determine at what point and what growth stage that they're at. And then we also want to start scouting for pod worms and for leaf feeding worms out there to try to determine are we at a spray threshold, try to protect our harvest and protect our crop that we have. One of the things that I have here in front of me is the Beck's 2020 Practical Farm Research, and if we'll take a look on page 14 on this book here, there's a very interesting study here, a proven PFR study that talks about soybean fungicides. Soybean fungicides haven't been widely used in our area in the past, but here's a 7-year study that makes some very interesting points, and one of them being that the R3 stage is very, very critical that we hit and target that time frame. Before and after that really does not give enough yield advantage, according to this study, to create a proven or a return on investment. But by going in that R3's time frame, we can see that they're showing about a $17 per acre return on investment. I'm anxious to try and look at some of these things. We're going to be doing a test plot on some of our own farm this year, showing again some of that research to see if we can mimic or can replicate that on our own farm here locally in Kansas. So with that, let's take a look at some of these soybeans and see what growth stage they're at. So a couple of the tools that are necessary for scouting for some of those things, I always carry a white bucket with me. I prefer a white bucket. You can use other colors, but with a white bucket it's so much easier to see what you've got in your bucket as far as leaf and worms and pod feeding worms out there. Another thing I like to carry is some type of a scissor, something that will take and allow us to cut those plants off without shaking them a lot. You can use a pocket knife, you can tear them out of the ground. But leaf feeders and pod worms are bad about when you brush against them or when you knock the plant, they tend to fall off. They get scared and they tend to fall off under the ground, and so we don't get a good accurate count. With that being said, we also need to be very cautious that as we're approaching the area that we're going to test, that we come from the side of it instead of walking through it and then turning around and getting. So we need to kind of almost sneak up on the plant. They're not going to necessarily jump off because we approach it from a scared standpoint, but we need to be careful that when we approach it we don't brush the plant and knock them off. We usually take about 1 foot of row and evaluate the worms and population stuff off of that. So let's step over here carefully and take a look and see what we have in this plant over here. Again, the first thing that we want to do is take a look at this plant for what we're doing here today and take a look and see what growth stage are we at. R3 is where they have determined has the most return on investment for a fungicide trial. And that's whenever in one of the top 4 nodes here that we have a 3/16 pod. We can see that these soybeans are a little bit past that because we have larger pods than that. And so we're borderline on the too late side to see the full benefit according to their studies. My soybeans that we're going to be doing that on are actually a longer season and they have not reached this stage. And so we will be applying fungicide and trying that locally and stay updated to try to get the results off of that. So we're going to go ahead and take our scissors out here and try to cut some plants off here. Let's take a look at what we can find. So I'm going to start right here. I'm going to carefully cut off the bottom of this plant. And then I attempt to, as careful as possible, take that plant and stuff it down into the bucket. I go head down into the bucket and then I begin to just slap it back and forth. Again, remember, they're easily brushed off. So we take and just slowly work our way out and knocking those leaves off of there and down into the bucket. That is one plant. Again, remember, we're going to try to do about 2 foot a row. About 1 foot a row. We're going to keep repeating this until we get 1 foot. Sometimes I'll take more than one plant at a time if they are not so big that they fill the bucket up too tight. In these plants, it looks like I'm able to get more than one in there. Again, just continually knocking those out. Take a few of the excess leaves out of there that are falling out of there. Looks like that I have about a foot a row here, so I'm going to stop with that. And then we take a look down in here. We can take a shake this bucket around, take out some of these pods for easier viewing of it, some of the extra debris and stuff like that. Really not seeing anything on the debris that I've taken out. So we start to look down in the bucket and look for some type of a deal. So here we have a worm down in the bottom of here. If you can take and see that, that is called a green clover worm. And so we're having a little trouble getting the video on there. There he is. That's called a green clover worm. I do not believe that that is a pod feeder. One of the characteristics of a green clover worm is that as you fool with it like this, you see how he's jumping and so active. Your pod feeding typically are not that active, but your little leaf feeders are very active like that. I'm not seeing anything else in here. Let me look a little bit here. I thought I saw a stink bug in there earlier, but I'm not seeing him now. But those are the things that we'll look for. Maybe later on in the season, we'll be able to show you actually what the regular worm looks like. We typically feel like with leaf feeders, and here's some leaf feeding that we're seeing on here. So we're starting to get a little bit of leaf feeding. We typically say that we have to have 50% defoliation on a soybean plant before we start seeing any yield loss. We normally would say that between 15 and 20 leaf feeders per foot a row is a threshold for spraying leaf feeding worms and things. That will include all of your leaf feeders. So bean leaf beetles, that'll include your clover worms, all of those type of insects that feed on the leaves. We typically count them all together and come up with a threshold of about 15. With the pod worms, once we get to a fall armyworm or a pod worm, I usually figure if I have one of those per foot a row, because of the severity of the damage that they have, we like to take and treat those immediately. Another thing to look for as you're walking through the fields is to take and look and see if it looks like there is spider webbing. And typically they'll take and roll the leaf together and just create a spider web around that leaf. That is the webworm. And so that is again, a very aggressive insect, and in a very short amount of time they can create a lot of damage. So if we start to see any of that, again, we want to address that issue and begin our insecticide spray on that. So that's just a little scouting tip again for you here today. In the event that you have any questions, give us a call here at Central Ag, and make sure y'all stay safe out there, and we will see you on the next one.